Hello, my name is Justyna Jajszczok and I work at the University of Silesia. In this video, I will analyze Agatha Christie's short story The Witness for the Prosecution. As you can imagine, there will be spoilers, so if you would like to enjoy the story as it was intended, please pause the video now and go and read the story or listen to its audio version, several of which are available on YouTube. And when you're ready, come back here. First, I will present a summary of the story, then I'll give you a bit of a background and mention the rules of the game that will help us establish how the story is constructed. Finally, we'll trace the clues and red herrings to see how we can develop a simple storyline into a whodunit. Hopefully, at the end of this video, you will be able to spot the telltale signs of a detective story, if not create one yourself. Enjoy! The story. The story begins with the meeting of the solicitor, Mr. Mayhem, with the client, the young man of 33, Leonard Vaux, charged with willful murder of Miss Emily French, an eccentric elderly lady whom Leonard met a few weeks before. Miss French, being a lonely woman living with her 8 cats and craving some meaningful human contact, befriends Leonard and invites him into her life, to the displeasure of her maid, Janet Mackenzie, who immediately takes a violent dislike to Mr. Vaux. This unlikely friendship does look suspicious, especially since Leonard admits to having some financial trouble, and Miss French being very well off. She also gives him access to her business affairs and leaves a will that makes Vaux the principal beneficiary. He claims to have no knowledge of the will, but this is contradicted by Janet, who says Miss French told her how she had consulted the contents of the will with Mr. Vaux. She also states that Mr. Vaux passed himself as a single man, while in fact being married, with the intention of marrying the old lady, an accusation he vehemently denies. Mr. Mayhem also tells him that it is Janet who, on the night of the murder, returns home at 9:30 and hears Miss French speaking behind the closed door with some man Janet assumes to be Leonard. Leonard believes his alibi at this point is set in stone, as his wife would surely confirm that he was at home at the time of the murder. Mr. Mayhem is not convinced that the testimony of a devoted wife would sway the jury in his favor, especially since nobody else could attest to Mr. Vaux's whereabouts at the time. However, he believes in Leonard's innocence. All of this exposition is presented through the first scene of the conversation between the client and his solicitor. Next, we move to the Vaux's shabby house, in which Mr. Mayhem questions Mrs. Vaux. This interview is full of surprises. We learn that Romaine Vaux is not English but distinctly foreign, not just in her accent, but also hand gestures. She is also tall, pale, and attractive. We also learn that she used to be an actress in Vienna. Once she hears all about the sorry affair, she asks the crucial question: will the jury believe me when I confirm my husband's alibi? Mr. Mayhem does not share his doubts with her, but she reads them from his demeanor. At this point, she seems to have abandoned her role of a devoted wife and transforms into a cold-blooded, unscrupulous woman. She claims that she hates Leonard and wants to see him hanged. And the worst of all, she is not his wife. They are just pretending to be married because Romaine already has a husband. All of this is too much for the solicitor, who leaves in a hurry. Yet this turn of events only strengthens his belief in his client's innocence. Then we move to the scene in the court, where both witnesses for the prosecution, Janet Mackenzie and Romaine, implicate Leonard Vaux in the murder of Miss Emily French. Mr. Mayhem's only hope in proving his client's innocence is finding the man Miss French was speaking to before she died. He believes it could have been her nephew, someone Janet Mackenzie is very fond of, but he is nowhere to be found. The case goes to trial, and Mr. Leonard Vaughan faces a death sentence. Suddenly, there is a turn in Mr. Mayhan's bad fortune. He receives a strange letter written in very poor, badly spelled English, urging him to come to Shaw's Rents and meet with one Mrs. Moxon. Half believing it to be a hoax, the solicitor goes to the address. The door is opened by a woman of middle age, bent in figure, with a mass of untidy grey hair and a scarf wound tightly around her face. She also has a nervous tic of clenching and unclenching her hands. In the course of the conversation, she removes the scarf to reveal a scar which, she says, was caused by vitriol flung in her face. She shows him letters from Romain to a mysterious man, Max, in which the woman believed to be Mrs. Vaughan confesses her love for this mysterious man and swears to incriminate Leonard in court. When asked how she came into possession of the letters, Mrs. Moxon replies, "Never mind how I got hold of it, that's my business, it'll do the trick." It turns out Romain's lover, Max, is the man who disfigured her face, and now Mrs. Moxon wants revenge. The day of the trial arrives. First, Janet Mackenzie gives evidence, but the prosecution star is Romain, who tells the court how Leonard left the house with the murder weapon, returned home with blood on his cuffs, and confessed to having killed Miss French. The case seems all but lost. But then Mr. Mayhan takes the floor and reads Romain's letter to Max, in which she explains in detail how she is going to frame Leonard for the crime. At this, Romain breaks down and admits her lies. In a dramatic turn of events, Mr. Vaughan is declared not guilty and acquitted of murder. But is he really innocent? Only in this moment does Mr. Mayhan realize that Romain's foreign gestures remind him of something else. The penny drops. Mrs. Moxon had the same tic. Impossible. But then he remembers. Romain is an actress, and it all seems to fit into place. The final conversation between Mr. Mayhan and Romain takes place some time later. Romain admits freely to having fabricated everything, pretending to be Mrs. Moxon, the letters, even the existence of Max. "I had to save him. The evidence of a woman devoted to him would not have been enough. You hinted as much yourself. But I know something of the psychology of crowds. Let my evidence be wrung from me, as an admission, damning me in the eyes of the law, and a reaction in favor of the prisoner would immediately set in." Why such an elaborate comedy? Because, Mr. Mayhan, while you believed Leonard to be innocent, I knew he was guilty. It turns out that it was Leonard all along, and Romain perjured herself to save him. Now, is it possible for the reader to guess the solution of the story before it is revealed at the end? I think it is, and I would like to show you how. But first, let's look at the rules that classic detective stories operated under. Agatha Christie and many other mystery writers were part of an organization known as the Detection Club. Every writer who wished to be a member had to swear an oath to follow rules of detective fiction, also known as the Detection Club Oath. This was done to assure that the writers played fair by the readers. Hence, such rules as not placing reliance on, nor making use of, divine revelation, feminine intuition, mumbo-jumbo, jiggery-pokery, coincidence, or the act of God, and promising, utterly and forever, to forswear mysterious poisons unknown to science. These would not be considered fair play, because the reader would have no chance of knowing them beforehand. The most important rule of the Detection Club was the following: never to conceal a vital clue from the reader. This means that the reader should have access to all the information the detective has. This is why a good detective story works like a magic trick. You have to use misdirection and false clues so that the real ones may be overlooked. Let's look at our story again, this time looking for actual clues and red herrings. The most important clue is that Romaine is an actress. This assumes her knowledge of the craft and stage makeup. Not only can she transform into another person using special effects, but she could also tutor Leonard to play his part of an innocent victim. Play well, or at least well enough to fool Mr. Mayhem. The second clue that ultimately betrays the ruse is Romaine's unconscious hand gestures, which she inadvertently keeps as Mrs. Moxon. These, of course, are more subtly presented in the story. In Mrs. Vole, the solicitor notices an occasional very slight movement of the hands that was distinctly foreign, while Mrs. Moxon's hands are described as clenching and unclenching themselves nervously. Only when he notices his own habits does Mr. Mayhem realize the significance of these similarities. Thirdly, Romaine realizes that her testimony in favor of Leonard is worthless because nobody will believe that she isn't just lying to protect her partner. Therefore, she decides to tell the truth in the court about Leonard being the actual killer, and then has her reputation undermined and questioned. She hogs the limelight to such an extent that people forget to consider who could have actually killed Miss French. In terms of composition, another clear clue for the reader is the number of possible suspects. One of the rules followed by the members of the detection club was that the criminal must be mentioned before in the story. Our pool of suspects in the witness for the prosecution is very limited. Leonard Vole, his wife Romaine, Janet Mackenzie, Mrs. Moxon, the missing nephew, and Mr. Mayhem himself. If we believe Janet's statement that before her death Miss French was talking to some man, we're left just with 3 male characters, and by the process of elimination, only Mr. Vole is a likely candidate. He has means, motive, and opportunity, and has no alibi. Now, let's look at red herrings, that is, false clues planted specially to fool the reader. The most significant red herring in the story is the protagonist, Mr. Mayhem. In the very first paragraph, he is presented as a small man, precise in manner, neatly, not to say foppishly dressed, with a pair of very shrewd and piercing grey eyes, by no means a fool. He is expressly referred to in the text as no fool, so we naturally gravitate towards his opinion on his client. Against all odds, he believes him. He cannot put his finger on it, but something tells him young Mr. Vole is innocent. First off, Mr. Vole tells him he is innocent straight to his face. He would have to be a great actor to pull this off, and he wouldn't fool Mr. Mayhem because, as we know, he is no fool. Well, actually, he is. He is taken in by Leonard's performance. He never questions the sudden change in Romaine's attitude towards her partner. He accepts the convenient revelations from Mrs. Moxon's letters uncritically and fails to realize in time that Mrs. Moxon and Romaine are one and the same person. Because he is presented as a reliable, no-nonsense lawyer, we follow his train of thought and are manipulated into believing what he believes. The second significant red herring is Romaine's surprising behavior. Her obsessive attempts at incriminating Leonard are supposed to take Mr. Mayhem's and the reader's attention away from the actual culprit to someone else. But there is nobody else, which such a clever solicitor should have realized. As the witness for the prosecution shows, the formula for a whodunit is quite simple. Start with the crime. In this case, we have a murder with an obvious suspect who has means, motive, and opportunity. Now we need to prove that our suspect could not have done it. To do so, we employ the red herring in the form of a very foolish detective, whom we present as very clever. Thanks to this strategy, we can present all the clues, the reversal of the wife's testimony, her profession, and her characteristic tic, in front of the detective's eyes, with the hope that neither he nor the reader will realize. Finally, we take pity on the poor investigator and let him notice one of the clues, and the rest follows. Hopefully, by this time the reader has already worked out the ins and outs of the story and achieved the satisfaction of guessing whodunit before the denouement. And that's it. That is, in very simple terms, an instruction of how to read and also how to write a whodunit. I hope this will assist you in your future readings and maybe even creating new detective stories. Who knows, maybe a future Agatha Christie is watching at the moment. That would be great. Good luck with your plotting and thanks for watching.